Sorry. I would recommend that you put your microphone on mute and your camera off to preserve broadband. The session will be recorded, and the recording and the slide will be made available on the microsite. So if you want to catch up a little bit, it's not a problem. And if you see slides of interest you want to pursue further, again, it's not a problem. Just get in touch. So what's the agenda today? We're going to review our learning and our finding from the programs, and we're going to do that in two parts, taking a break in between. The first part will look at the webinar programs and the learnings, and we really did two series. The awareness series, during which we use a lean thinking tool, which was the 5W and 2Hs that most of you would be familiar with. And we also did a chapter series where we use a design thinking tool called the double diamond, and I'll come back to that. Take a break, and then we review our one-to-one programs and finding. And as part of the program, we are offering one-to-one with companies. So the webinars tend to be a bit more generic, and the one-to-one tend to be a bit more specifics. And for that, we looked at the survey and the feedback and what was the drive behind that. And we'll look at the topic. So what did the one-to-one weigh around innovation, around opportunities, around skills, and around the roadmap? And the roadmap seems to be the one that's the most significant at the moment. So if I start with the webinar program, we delivered 7 of those webinars last year. And all can be found on our microsite, on the Scottish Engineering website, the Net Zero Microsite. And you've got all 7 webinars there, and you can go and see the videos. But most importantly, you get access to the slides, and you can zoom through the slides and find out which one you think you would investigate further and revert back to us so we can see how we can help. And there is 2 series, and as I mentioned, and I'm going to look into getting more details on those 2 series. But that's where you find all the slides and more. Like for standards, you may find the Excel file being of use, for example. And we're planning, and I'll come back to that, we're planning to put more on that microsite. So the awareness series was made of webinar 1 and 2. And also webinar 7, which was focused more on the standard. So we use the methodology, as I said, in lean thinking, 5 Ws, which is the what, the why, the where, and the when, and the who, and the 2 Hs, which were how and how much. And what you have here is how it's linked. So if you look at the what, the task, which is about becoming net zero, then you would get that information in webinar 1, part 2. If you think about the why, it's the same thing, it's adding value, and you've got that in webinar 1, part 1, for example, or webinar 7, standards. And where is about methodology, and it's about the location, it's about the boundaries, it's webinar 7. The when, which is about the roadmap, and it's about making it smart, so it's part 4, webinar 2. The who is about the stakeholders, and it's about the skills, and you get that in webinar 2, part 3. The how is about the methodology, so it'll be webinar 7 on the standards. And how much is about the financing of it and its funding, and you get a lot of information in webinar 2, part 3. So you can see how we use that methodology, and we use the webinars to address each one of those Ws and Hs. So if I dive into it a bit more in more details, what was the what? The what is about greenhouse gas emission, and can it be avoided? No. Reducing them cannot be ignored. And as I said, that's what you get into the webinar series. So what are those greenhouse gas emissions? And we talked about scopes. And there is scope 1, which is the easiest one to understand, which is your direct emission, the one that you emit when you run your product or your development, your service. which you're manufacturing, whichever way you do it, that's your direct one. The scope 2 is also fairly easy to understand. That's the electricity you buy. So or it could be steam, or it could be heat if you buy heat directly or steam directly. But most of the time, it'll be about electricity you buy. The one which is more complex is scope 3. And scope 3 is indirect emissions. That's mainly the emission in supply chain. They are made of 15 different kinds, and they are split in upstream and downstream emissions. So that's really the what is about emission that we need to reduce. There is no question here that everybody is in agreement with that. The way. So again, if you look at the way, then you can refer to webinars, but really it is because reducing it will improve or decrease the climate impact, but more importantly, it's because it adds value. So how does it add value? Well, first of all, there is no planet B. That's why it can't be avoided. There is no plan B, and there is no planet B. So we need to make sure that we are doing what we can do to reduce those emissions. Secondly, there is part of a loop, a process, a circle that involves the whole of the society. So you start with the United Nations, the world, to which Europe has developed their own tracker. And from that came the 10 points of the UK government. Out of that came the Scotland. So UK government, Europe is about 2050. The Scottish government came up and offered to deliver that and put it in law by 2045. But to get there by 2045, they've developed a climate change plan to 2032. And to deliver that plan, there's a need for skills. So SD has developed the CSAP to 2025. But the cornerstone of all these to close the loop are Scottish businesses. So it is important to realise that here what we've got is Scotland as a leader. So we've got a great opportunity. And as part of that leadership, then the Scottish businesses is a must. So we need to make sure that we close that loop. Now, why now? Who cares? Well, everybody cares. And it starts with the consumer, because the consumer is a voter, the government is interested. But because the consumer is a buyer, the customer are interested. And because the consumer is also a worker, an employee, they are interested. So what you have is here, people don't leave their value at home when they go to work, when they go to vote, when they go to shop. So everybody cares. So the consumer cares, and because they care, the customer cares. Because the customer cares and consumer cares, and employee cares about it. And on the other side is the competitors cares. And why do they care? They care because they see an opportunity. They see an opportunity to differentiate themselves, to offer something new. So the disruptor and the competitors, they care also. SME cares because they are doing work about it, and the government cares for voting reasons, but also for taxation reasons. So everybody cares, but especially the SMEs. It's one of those cornerstones in order to be able to close the loop I mentioned about earlier on. And if I take the example, pardon me, of multinational companies, they care enough to put in place those plans. So they reckon that 67% of them will reduce their supplier emission. Their first step would be their supplier emission at their net zero strategy. So what that means is that to demonstrate that they've got a carbon reduction plan, to demonstrate that they are becoming net zero, the first thing they're going to do is ask their supplier, what is your net zero ambition? What is your net zero strategy? And out of that, they reckon that if they find the transition is too slow or it's inexistent, that doesn't happen, 78% of those multinationals say they'll start removing those suppliers from the list. And finally, they reckon that 35% of the current supplier will be cut by then. So you've got their roadmap, for example. So you're talking again of MNC, multinational companies, and you've got where they want to be by 2050. They are supporting SMEs to help them getting there. And interestingly enough, the biggest percentage is about becoming on that preferred supplier list. So again, you can see the ways of value of having a net zero strategy, having a net zero roadmap. And finally, for all of us individuals, it's an opportunity to leave a positive legacy. And I quite like that idea of a letter to your son, your daughter, your family. Did you know about it? Yes, and that's what you did. Where do you do that? What do you include or exclude? How do you define your boundaries? And the way you define the boundaries is by defining the location. And the way you look at that is, first of all, you've got your organizational boundaries. So, and it's all based on your control. What are you controlling? Is that equity share? Is that financial control? Is that 100% control? Is that no control? So that's how you account for all the emissions that goes into your roadmap. And then there is the operational boundaries. So the operational are the scope we talked about, 1, 2, and 3. And the scope 1 and 2 are mandatory, regardless of how you look at it, regardless of your methodology. And then scope 3 may or may not be mandatory. It may be optional, but most of the time you'll be requested to at least do an assessment of it, even if you don't include it in your roadmap or if you don't include it in your ambitions, an assessment of it will be required. So when it's about the roadmap, it's about making that roadmap smart. So we talked about it being specific, it being measurable, achievable, relevant, but it also needs to be time bound, and that can be the most challenging part. So it's about being smart. And again, here you find more information on that session 2 or webinar 2. And an example of such a roadmap, of such a concept is here. So you can see how that roadmap is smart. So it is specific, it highlights specific topics. It is measurable, it's got value, how much it's going to decrease over the time period. It is achievable. You would assume that whoever built that roadmap will build an achievable roadmap. It is relevant because it's looking at the scope 1, 2, and 3, so fully relevant to greenhouse gas. And as you can see on the right hand side, it is time bound. So we've got here is a smart roadmap, which is simple. So roadmap don't have to be complex, convoluted things. It can be as simple as that. Another example is if you were going to use greenhouse gas protocol, for example, they provide you a way to develop a roadmap and how to go about it and a methodology. You'll find standards in there, you'll find guidance and other documentation to help you, but you can see their proposed system for the roadmap deliver a smart roadmap. It makes it specific, it makes it measurable, it is achievable, realistic, and last but not least, it is time bound. So that's another example of how to build a smart roadmap. And then if I look at the Scottish Government roadmap, and for that I use their Climate Change Act of 2019, that's the updated version versus 2009. And their base year is 1990. And then the greenhouse gas they include are the Kyoto 1+1, which is the greenhouse gas protocol. And their roadmap is smart in the sense of it's specific. You've got a specific greenhouse gas, is measurable. You've got value, 56% by 2020, 35% by 2030, 90% by 2040, and 100% by 2045. So it is measurable, achievable. At least they believe it is achievable. It is relevant because it's looking at the greenhouse gas, especially in reducing emissions. And as you can see, it is time bound. So it's as simple as that. A roadmap can be as simple as that. Now, the other option you have is look at more roadmap for SME, and we can look at that exponential roadmap initiative and looking at the pillars. And the pillars are really it gives you an idea of what you want to tackle first or during that roadmap. And the first thing is your own emission. That's the one we talked about, which is scope 1 and scope 2. The second pillar is about your supply chain emission, and that's the upstream, the downstream, and that's scope 3 we talked about. And then what you want to do is to integrate climate change into your business strategy. So it's how when you develop new product, new services, how do you include, or even put at the center, at the heart of it, you put your climate change ambitions. And finally, the fourth pillar is influence your society around you, but influence your community, and start influencing your employee, then the wider community, and then maybe society. So what you want to do in a roadmap is really at the start of it, in the medium term, focus on pillar 1 and 2. Now, if I was going to take both of them and put them together, a roadmap may look like that. So you would have, the time, the same under the Scottish Government timing, the same ambition in the Scottish Government timing, and then you marry that with pillars. So by 2030, you want to resolve scope 1 and 2. By 2040, you want to resolve scope 3. And then by 2045, you want to strategize and clean that. So think about circularity, for example, that's where that would come through. And then once you've achieved your target, it's about influencing your community, so your industry. So that's what you have. So that could be a roadmap, and it's as simple as that. So who? Stakeholders. Then what you want to do here is address any knowledge and skills gap you have. And again, so you get that into webinar 2, you get more information. So from the businesses, if you look, we did a quick survey at the end of our webinar, and really there is a need. So when we look at the skills, then we reckon that, the surveyed organization came back and said you've got only 3% who are not planning to start. So the not doing a roadmap is really not happening here. Everybody understands that there is a need for that, and more than half, 55% of those organizations are planning on the first phase of that. But almost half of organizations need support, and interestingly enough, a lot of those are about skills. So there is skills needed to deliver that roadmap, to define the who and to define the how. Your employees, so you're looking at upskilling and reskilling, and a quarter of the employees believe that they want to have a role, a function that has an impact, that makes a difference, and there is no bigger impact or difference than climate change. And that's where eco-consciousness is coming big in the trends and in how people are thinking and behaving and purchasing. And again, as I said, people come to work with the same value and they've got back home. They don't leave those values at home when they come to work. At the other end, we've got 3/4 of the people believe that they need to upskill and they need to reskill. And interestingly enough, a high percentage of the people believe that they own that upskilling and that reskilling. There's no automatically the employer responsibilities. They need to do it, and they are prepared to do it outside of working hours on their own time. So that's it. If I would say too extreme, but even at 25%, that's a quarter of the people want a role into making climate better. So there's a key drive in your employees. So how do you go about it? And as mentioned, is keep it simple while you are addressing all the principles. And the principles are about relevance, completeness, accuracy, consistency, and transparency. And we looked at, in a webinar on standard, we looked at 4 specific standards: the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the Science-Based Target Initiative, the ISO standard, and the PAS, which is the public specification from the UK. And they all converge on its principle. That's why you need to address those principles of relevance, completeness, accuracy, consistency, and transparency. They all converge on boundaries. So we talked about organizational boundaries and what you control, and in terms of shares, but also financials or technical controls, and operational. Remember, is the scopes. So 1, 2, and 3, and they all converge on the reporting. So what you report, what you claim, and they all advise a third-party verifications as a mean to demonstrate independence and to keep your credibility up and avoid what's called greenwashing. But they diverge. And why are the main divergence? It wasn't included. And the most obvious example is scope 3. For some standard, it's optional. For some standard, it's mandatory. It's how you claim and the methodology you use to account for it, and how you report for it. And the transparency, the reporting, as I said, it can be different between those standards. So what you need to look at, and again, you can go onto our microsite, and once you've seen the webinar on the standard, you may identify, or you may think one of those standards is the right one for you. And in there, you'll find also an Excel spreadsheet where you can go and get more information on a specific standard. Ultimately, to implement it, you would have to procure it. Some of them are free, some of them you need to buy, but that's when you decide how you want to go about it. So what are our recommendations? Your recommendation is whatever makes sense for your customers, that's the first thing, and then your business, and then your resources, your employees. So where do you trade? Is it global or is it UK based? So that's where you may choose a different standard, and that's about relevance, because you want to use something which is recognized in your industry. And really what you're trying to avoid here is educating your customer. So you want to speak the same language to your customer. You want them to understand what you're talking about. ISO certification, do you have one? Because if you do have one, you may want to consider the ISO standard, because you already are used to the know-how, the PDCA, plan to check that. You may be able to also minimize the cost by getting audited on more than one ISO at a time, and that provide consistency. So that's another one of those principles. And then you also want to look at who are your customers. So for example, if you think that your customer is bidding for a big government contract, then they fall under the procurement notice, which will call for the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as part of the carbon reduction plan. So it's about being ready. It's about readiness and accuracy. So how do you get prepared? What you don't want to do is use a given system, process, methodology, and then finally your customer don't understand it, don't like it, want something different, and you need to redo it, because there is still a level of divergence. One level of verification and your planning. So you can self-certify, but that's the least, I would say, credible, because people are saying you just do it the way it suits you. Or you could have a mandatory third party. So that's the SBTI, or it could be optional, and then you can choose to have it verified or not. And it's about managing your communications here. It's about transparency. It's about why you're committing, and it's also about managing your costs, because when you do third-party verification, there's a cost that comes with it. And finally, you need to figure out what scopes you're happy to cover. And it could be 1 and 2, that's a given, regardless of the standard. But 3 may or may not be covered. It may or may not be covered in your statement, in your roadmap, but the assessment of 3, I would say, is highly recommended regardless of the standard. But that allows you to manage complexity, that allows you to deliver completeness in relation to a given process. So that's our recommendation. You need to look at those 5 points, decide where you sit, and decide what makes the most sense for you. And once you've got that methodology, you've got that standard, then I would recommend go and have a look at a spreadsheet. You get more details and you can see if it's still stack up. And then how much the funding of it. So funding and support is available here and now. So the first port of call, I would say, is our website, findbusinesssupport.co.uk. And when I looked at it yesterday, you had 538 support options. So they are not all going to be relevant, and you don't want to go over 500 reviews. But you can filter that. You can filter that, for example, for net zero. You can filter that for funding. You can filter that for skills. And it can also be filtered for support. It can be filtered for guidance. So there's plenty of opportunity. I would recommend to start on our website. And that's one of the things we have been recommending on the OnetoOne a lot. But then you need to filter it down, because you can't be looking at 500 odd opportunities. So to summarize those webinars, we had our webinar 1 that was looking at the consumer, the customer, the why and the what, and that was about delivering a vision, because with the why, you say why you're doing it, what is your vision. The what is your opportunities, the motivations. So it's really your customer. And then we looked at webinar 2, which was about skills and policy, and skills was about your capabilities, and the policy, the when, was about the roadmap, about developing a strategy. And the reason you want all 4 is then out of that you get innovations. And if you're missing one of them, if you don't have a vision, for example, you're just going to generate confusion without motivation, a reason for doing it. A customer, you're just going to face resistance. If you don't have the capability and the skills to do it, then you're just going to generate frustration. And finally, if there is no roadmap to put all that together, it just goes to waste. So that's why you want to address those 4, and that's webinar 1 and 2 mainly, that you get more information as a function of the part 1 to 4. So what we're learning. So the what is review all 3 scopes. 2 of them are mandatory. In the scope 3, you may or may not want to add it mandatory. Why do you do it? You want to do it because it's a win-win situation. It adds value to your organization, and it adds value to your customer, and it adds value to the society, and I would say your community at large, because there is no planet B. And finally, as individuals, it gives you a chance to leave a positive legacy. So that's why you do it. Where is the boundaries, the organizational boundaries, is what your business control? Are you part of a bigger group, or are you a single entity? Who are your stakeholders? And a big stakeholder in there is your employees, the suppliers, also governments. So supplier upstream, government downstream, yourself, the business, and your employees. And then last but not least, the most important, the consumer and the customer. When you make it smart, that's a learning. You need to make that roadmap smart. And how do you do that? That's how you use a standard. So the reason you get standards is for credibility, and you get credibility with verification, especially third-party verification. And how much then you look at guidance and funding opportunities, and that Find Business Support website, I think, should be the first part of call. So that was a learning from those webinars. Then we looked at the chapter series, which were webinar 3 to 6. And in those webinars, we looked at the chapters, because that's the chapter that you'll find in the climate change plan of the Scottish Government. And the reason we looked at it that way is we had a survey at the end of webinar 2, and we looked at what was important to our members, and what chapters matter the most. So that's where you can see the chapters and the webinars. So you've got 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we use the 4Ds, double diamond of discover, define, develop, and deliver to address, again, innovation, to address skills, opportunities, and roadmap. So we use a survey to develop that methodology, which was, that's what you can see as a double diamond, discover, define. So discover was about innovation and with a view to develop a vision. Define was about the opportunities to develop a motivation. Develop was about skills, and it has to develop your capabilities. And deliver was about a roadmap, is to provide to put it all together if you want to avoid waste and to avoid frustration, what we talked about earlier on. And as you can see here, there was 4 webinars organized to that. And all those, again, are all on our microsite. What we are going to do now is, as you can see, for each webinar, if I take the example of 4, for example, Paul, we use a double diamond, and we talked about, discover, define, develop, deliver, so horizontally. Now, what we're going to publish, and I want the webinar about it, is each pillar. So we have consolidated all the innovations across all the chapter into one document. And then we'll do the same for the opportunities, the skills, and the roadmap. And we are planning to put all that on our microsite. So if you have got more of interest in innovation, but less of interest in the specific chapters, then you can look at all innovation for all the chapters. And the same for opportunity, skills, and roadmap. And it's going to look something like that. So you would have innovations, you would have opportunities, you would have skills, and you would have a roadmap. And that will allow you to develop your vision, it allows you to develop the vision, the discover, the opportunity will allow you to look into, define the skills and develop, and the roadmap and deliver. So that's what we will do, and you will find all those published on your microsite, on the website, on the Scottish Engineering website. So I think it is now time for a quick 5 minutes break. We have looked at the webinar series. I've explained what we looked at, how you can go to it, how you can navigate through it. And what I'll do after the break is speak about the one-to-one program. And in the one-to-one program, I'll talk about the topics that have come up for each one of those 4Ds of innovations and opportunities and skills and roadmap. So I think it is 9:05 just now. So shall we reconvene in 9, 10, 5 minutes break?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I hope everybody's fine. We're going to keep going with our plantation, and we're going to be looking at the one-to-one program. Now we've looked at the webinar programs, and the way we start, or we looked at that one program was to try to understand where our members were and what they were looking at. So what we found out is that very few of our members are well underway. Only 18%, less than a fifth of our members believe that they're well underway. And about almost 3/4 of our organization we survey are at the beginning. It's either they're just starting their journey, or they are new to it. But really, what you're looking at is in terms of being on a journey, starting a journey, the why and the where, then 3/4 of the surveyed organizations just came back and said, we're already at the start of it. In terms of roadmap, and there is another thing that to define the what and the when, you need a roadmap, and that will be the first step on that journey. And as you can see here, only 4% of the survey organization are ready to publish that roadmap. So if you don't have one, or you're not ready, or you're the start of it, don't worry, you're not on your own. And then, but there is a recognition, and you've got about 53% of those organizations recognize that there is a need to develop a roadmap. There is a need for that vision, if you think about the 4 Ds. And then a big majority, 35%, are really at the start. So that's almost a third. That's over a third, actually. So again, you can see that if you are at the start of it, if you're trying to make sense of it all, you're not the only one. And interestingly enough, your customer will be in a very similar position. They are also trying to find their feet. Skills-wise, then there is that recognition that once you've got a roadmap, then you're going to need skills. And as I say, there's only 3% that are not planning to start. So everybody, it's just about planning to start. But people are struggling to make it smart. And to make it smart, there is a need for skills, and there is a need for support in general. And if you look at the support about information, 21%, the support about cost and benefits, the support about skills, you end up with about 42% of organizations are going to need some sort of support, and a big 14% is going to be about skills. So once you've defined your vision, once you define what you want to do and how you want to do it, then you need to review what your skills are. So that's what's coming through that. So what was our learning from that survey? Our learning was that the organizations are keen, and they're working hard. So a lot of organizations, there was only 4% that we are not going to do anything about it. So a lot of organizations are doing something about it. And a lot of organizations recognize that the roadmap is the first step. And to make that roadmap need to be smart, as we talked about it. But it is challenging. That's where people are struggling doing it smart. Doing a roadmap can be fairly straightforward. Making a smart roadmap is another story. And then there is a recognition that once that roadmap is put together, once the ambition and what we want to do and the why and the what has been clarified, and the when, then there's going to be a need for skill to deliver it. So skills to do the who, the how, and the how much. So if I look at the one-to-one, we delivered in 2021 over 70 of those, and those are some of the feedback we received, and what it is really is showing you that it's been useful. People are finding it interesting. They're getting information, which is good. and valuable. What we are trying to achieve here is when we do signposting, and we do a lot of signposting, we signpost to valuable organizations or valuable businesses or valuable members and network. So we don't just throw the ball over the wall, as I call it. So that's why you can see the one-to-one and the feedback. So you've got the survey, got the feedback. Now, if we look at innovation, you remember the 40. What did we talk about with companies when we talked about one-to-one innovation? What came up? What was the topic on innovation? So a lot of businesses were interested in technology examples. So we provided ideas and examples of technologies out there, opportunities out there. So maybe like, if we think hydrogen, we'll be talking about the hydrogen coast. We're talking about carbon capture. We could be talking about the rail cluster because we manage more than one cluster. We could be talking about offshore wind, which is another cluster, especially floating offshore. So that's the sort of thing we'd be looking at. More specifically, we had organization, we were talking about mobility and mobility as a service. So that was more about, how do you develop a service rather than develop a product? How do you change the way services are delivered? How do you change the way people move? And it could be organization you then signpost to. It could be like an emission science park, that sort of thing. And then there's a lot about waste. So it's a tricky one, waste, because over the last decade, through lean thinking, organizations have been working on getting as little waste as possible, because waste is cost. The challenge is then it becomes so small that the waste company are not interested in collecting that waste anymore, because they are just going to collect very little of it. So it can be a challenging situation, but people are still looking at how do I manage waste, especially how to recycle waste. So we talked about, we combined about fiber reinforced plastic, FRPs, which isn't easy to recycle, being glass or being carbon, whichever way it is. We looked about plastic because plastic is a really bad name at the moment. So how do you avoid landfill? Is there an opportunity into incineration and disposal? So those are the kind of area where we looked at innovation in terms of waste handling. So you can think about the collections and how you collect waste, electric vehicle, that sort of thing. But also how you manage your waste and how you minimize landfill, which is one of the key. If you go to the waste chapter of the Scottish Government, one of their key point of view is about minimizing landfill. So that's the sort of thing we talked about innovation. The idea of the one-to-one is about being a lot more specific to your organizations. What are your needs? So that's what we work on. We work on understanding your needs. And once we know what your needs are, then we can provide the support. So now is about innovation. And then the next D was about opportunity, defining opportunities. And why did we look at opportunities? So you've got opportunity in all chapters, as you can see there, starting from agriculture all the way to net zero or not zero, negative emission technology. It could electricity, you've got industry, you've got mobility, you have everything in there. And what did we talk about? So we looked at opportunity for businesses, and what we are looking at is two things. There is two opportunity side to it. One is becoming net zero yourself as an organization, and that's about what we looked at. It's about the roadmap, it's about the methodology, it's about finding what makes sense for you and how you duplicate as little as possible the work you do. But also it's about leveraging the opportunity that net zero creates, and that's what you've got here, those opportunities. And it's plenty of them in every sectors. With home numbers, we've been talking a lot about hydrogen. Hydrogen because of the hydrogen cost, hydrogen because people think it's going to be the future, and then it's hydrogen electric race using hydrogen cells or reservoirs to feed electric batteries. But it's going to be the next step. But it's also about the product, but it's also about the infrastructure. It's about the delivery of it, but it's also about its maintenance, that sort of thing. The challenges we've been talking about waste, businesses and companies, again, is waste. And waste is how you minimize it to start with, but also how do you recycle it? So circularity is a big thing we're talking about. And one of the biggest challenges, as you all know, is heating, electricity, the price of energy, which is currently going through the roof. And there is a keen interest. So there was a lot of work done on the lean thinking point of view, how you minimize the use of energy, because by minimizing the use, you minimize your cost. And now what we want to look at is how you minimize the use of dirty energy and maximize the use of clean energy. And that's the challenges. The challenges is electricity and gas. And one of the recommendations is to move away from gas. But can you afford to move away from gas? That's another story. So that's why, again, when you look at the methodology, you look at the standards, you want to think about which one is making sense for your business. How do you become net zero, not for net zero's sake, but become net zero because it adds value to your customer and their consumers, and add value to your business. So those are the opportunity we'll be looking at here. So within the one-to-one, but the key point here is that those opportunities are specific to a given organizations. So that's what we're supporting with. And then we look at skills and how do you connect with skills provider? How do you get the skills? And there is 3 ways to get the skills we looked at. One of the ways to get the skills is formal. If you say there's the OSF model, you'll find into the webinars on skills. I mentioned earlier on the generic one, but it will be about formal. And formal is about higher education. Higher education could be through a form of colleges, universities. It could be through apprenticeship. It's formal training. And here you can see how we can make the connections. We've got a network of universities like Strathclyde or University of West of Scotland, but also colleges. It doesn't have to be all universities. And an example here would be West College Scotland. And we have also connections with institute like NMIS that gives you training options. And it doesn't all have to be away. So you think about the Open University, and if you think about the 3/4 of employees prepared to get retrained in their own time, then that may be an opportunity you may want to look at. And we are not only Central Belt, it's not only Glasgow, Edinburgh, but you can see it's Highland and Islands, it's Aberdeen. So Dundee, there is a lot of choice. And one of the areas I've been talking a lot about is the KTP opportunities with few organizations. I've run a few myself, so I've got experience, and that's where I think they can be of interest, but they are not the only options. So those are what we talked about: skills and the formal, the F or SF. The social facade or SF is about connecting with innovation centres across Scotland. As you can see, there is a lot of them. Each one tend to be specific. So we can look at data, we can look at mobility through the Mission Science Park, we could look at energy, we could look at climate change. So you've got climate solution here, or you could look at the biobase and IBIO-IC. You could look at agriculture with Lantra. So you can see there is a lot of organizations out there that are here to support your skills and provide skills. And in a social bit, so in a formal we talked about, it's more likely to be skills you want to bring in-house and keep. In the social and looking at those innovation institutes, it's more likely that you'll be looking at skills you need to launch your product or your service, but you may not want to keep forever. So the first one will be probably looking at maintenance. The second one will probably be looking at implementations. So that's another area for skills. Last but not least is funding. So how do you get all those skills? So we, again, into the OnetoOne program, we've been signposting people to funding organization, to funding opportunities, and that could be funding for apprenticeships. It could we have made a recommendation regarding the flexible workforce development fund, the green job funding, the NTTF or the National Transition Training Fund. So you can see here there's a lot of organization. Again, I would direct you and have directed businesses doing those one-to-one to that website, generic website about Find Business Support. That will include skills, but you can see here there's a lot of organizations prepared to provide support and funding for developing skills. The Scottish Funding Council, SDS, obviously is the main one, the first part of call, I would say. Also around the skills workforce, and the KTA and the KTP UKRI is another one I've mentioned earlier on that could be of interest. So there is funding available. It's just a case of finding the funding that suits you, your organization, and available for your organization. So it will depend on, are you an SME or you're not an SME? Are you part of a bigger group, a bigger corporation? That sort of things. And finally, talking about innovations on skills, I wanted to mention maybe we've not tried it, so I'm not endorsing it, but what I'm showing is that there is ways and there are help and support out there in finding out what are your skill gaps. So once you've defined your roadmap, you've got your ambitions, what you want to do, where you want to do, maybe you want to pivot, you want to move from oil and gas into hydrogen and carbon capture, for example. You may want to identify what are the skill gap, and that's one of the potential innovations you could be looking at to identify the skill gaps, and then we can provide support in helping you filling those skills gaps. So that's the skills, and then comes the roadmap. How do you put that roadmap together? So what we talked in a one-to-one, we talked earlier on in the webinars about methodology, about what to do and keep it simple. Here again, example of a simple roadmap, but really we all use the same process, and all the one-to-ones I've had go the same way. They try to define a program charter. So what do you want to be by when? And then you identify your gap, you do a benchmark, not a benchmark, you make a line in the sand, I would say, to define your base year, and then how you're going to go about it, and then you track it. So what do we do on a one-to-one? So we are offering on-site awareness training implementation, so we could come on-site if that was of value, and we could do an awareness training, we could do a presentation. It could be either to everybody, or it could be specific, maybe shop floor, or specific to the C-suite, any area, because the interlocutors may change or may have different ambitions or different needs we need to address. And what we look at is what we've supported is providing examples of roadmap that we have done it today, to show you how it can be done and simple. And we've made it clear that roadmap, it needs to be a smart roadmap. And in that sense, we are reviewing and making propositions and making recommendations on the roadmap. Again, that's based on our understanding. One of the things we're planning to do, and one of the responsibilities I have, is to develop Scottish engineering roadmap, and to that extent, then the learning we're going to have on the way there will be shared on a regular basis with your members. We've also been having conversation about ETS, so which is the emission trading scheme, and there is a recognition that the likelihood of a business reaching absolute zero is pretty remote, so there will be a need for emission trading scheme, i.e. planting trees or what you've heard of, but there is a need for a carbon reduction plan, so you can't just use ETS just to compensate for your emission. That's the greenwashing problem. So that's another area where we've provided support to companies trying to understand what are ETS, what could be the cost, what are the quality. And we looked at more specific like hydro, solar and wind, anything in those options. And the other area, because we know is starting to happen, is taxonomy. So we had a communication last year on the packaging tax, which is coming in place this year. But what you can see is for big organization, then taxonomy is starting to hurt. So those are the topic. And then if we looked at what was the purpose of the roadmap, so a roadmap is a tool that allows you to align with your customer, align with your supplier, align with your people and the wider community, and to communicate. What are you anticipating? What you want to do? What are your ambitions? But why it isn't as a secret. So you need to make sure that it is shared across your community, shared across your employees, shared across your suppliers, and shared across your customers. So that's the purpose of the roadmap. Now, it needs to focus on the outcome, on the why. Why are you doing it? What are your objectives, by when? So you need a vision. That's what the roadmap is about. And finally, it needs frames. So how do you put that together? How is it simple? So an example we've been mentioning to our members during the one-to-one is using the ocean matrix, and that allows you to define the what, how far, the how much, and the who. It's a one pager. So on one page, you've got all the information. So it makes it specific, and specific, that's the what. It makes it measurable, and the measurable is the how much, because that's a KPI. Achievable is who, so you put the resources in place, and you can achieve it because you have the right resources with the right skill in place. It's relevant, it says how you're going to do it, and finally it's time bound because it says how far you're going to go. So you're looking at your long-term objective and you're going, what do you need to do next year? So you put all that together, how it may look like? Well, it may look something like that. So if I look at the Scottish Engineering and I look at it, then the long-term ambition will be, 75% reduction by 2030. That's in line with the Scottish Government ambitions. And then once you've defined your long-term, what do you need to do next year, 2022? And what are your top-level commitments? Oh, sorry, next year, I meant this year, 2022. And what are your top-level commitments? And then your KPIs, what are you going to measure and track? And finally, who is going to be owning it? So the KPI could be from your scope 1 emission. By defining your scope 1 emission, then you're going to set targets. Having set targets, you can define your roadmap. Having the roadmap will reduce your scope 1 emissions. So your roadmap will say that level in 2022, 3, 4, 5, that level in 75% in 2030. And who is achievable? That's who owns what. So that's an example of a roadmap where all the information is on one page. So that's an example we've been talking about it. In terms of roadmap, also we've been talking through those one-to-one with methodology. So as I mentioned, all the standards converge, and we looked at the 4 main standards that are being used out there, but they diverge in some key areas. And as where they diverge, that you need to understand what you want to do and how you want to do it, and what the options are. So that not least, what is understood by your customers, so you don't have to do educations. But that's the other area where we've been supporting organization is methodology and what to look out for. So what have been our finding through the one-to-one? So developing a roadmap is a must, and I define the how and the where to start. So that's the first step. And then selecting a methodology, how you're going to measure, how you're going to track that roadmap. And the challenge is choosing the right one. And choosing the right one in the sense that it's understood by your customer, but also it's using things you're already doing. So the idea of the methodology is how can you use what you already measure? So the example of ISO 14001, you may already doing a lot of tracking to get compliance. So how can you use that tracking to keep growing and become net zero? The next question is about leading or following. So what is the interest? The interest from your customer and the interest from headquarters. So maybe you are part of a bigger group, and then headquarters have made, or your owner, if you want, have made bigger commitment. How do you participate in that? How do you support that? And how do you support that by still, supporting your customer? And you raise the question of competitiveness. And the challenge here is, because the standards are the same in a large extent, but still diverge in the actual measurements, how do you make sure that you compare with your competitors the same way, so you don't look like you're emitting more, but simply because you're using a different methodology, not because you're actually emitting more? So that could be the challenge. And finally, or last but not least, limited resources. We need to understand that we are understanding that SMEs have a limited amount of resources, human and financial. So funding is one thing, but human resources is another thing, and skills. So that's what came out of it. That's the finding for the one-to-one, and that's the one we're providing recommendations, hopefully solution to in a one-to-one. So to summarize our one-to-one program, we delivered 7 webinars that you can get in our microsite. Webinar 8 is coming today, and it'll also be on the microsite. The microsite had a fair amount of visits, almost 5,000 times, and we managed to reach out through that program 153 organizations and 237 individuals. So you can see that there is an interest. It goes back to that survey, and one-to-one, we deliver over 70 of those, and there are a lot more specifics, and organizations are finding value about it. And a lot of the information we get is from a library we built. So we're distilling it to what matters to you, but we've got a library of over 230 reports on all topics net zero, and that's where we go and tap for information to support you. So that concludes the webinars. I'll use the opportunity to thank Sarah for supporting me this morning and making sure it goes as smooth as possible. I want to thank you all for joining us. Please get in touch. You've got the details here, but you can get in touch directly with me if you see anything of interest that you would like to pursue further. The one-to-one program is open to all, and I think I'll open the floor to questions.
Doesn't appear to be any questions at the moment, Eric. I've just put a wee note in saying any questions can be posted in the chat function, and we'll address now. Or if perhaps, well, here we are. Duncan Scott, can you please remind us how to find the microsite? I'll send over
So yeah, so Sarah will send the details, but you go on the Scottish Engineering website, and I think let me go back. Those slides you're seeing will be on the microsite here. Right. There we go.
Yes, so the microsite is really just on the Scottish Engineering website, but I can send a link to everybody along with the recording
that'd be great.
and the slides.
Thank you. So that's a way to get it. Go to Scottish Engineering website. There's a net zero in there. We've got the webinars.
No questions in the chat function.
Okay.
It's up to you if you maybe want to wrap up early.
Yeah, if there is no questions, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, membership is welcome, but you don't have to be a member. We're here to help. It is a great opportunity, so please do.
We've got a question here, Eric, from Samantha Jameson, asking, can the aspect and impact risk assessment be used for the roadmap? I
would say yes. The only thing is to link them to the scope. So what you would want to do is, you've got scope 1, 2, and 3. You've got assess your risk, your impact, and then that's what you can use, and making sure that it matches. So there is a document which reach out, and I'm happy to share, which shows, for example, how ISO 14001 can be linked to climate change actions. So that would be one of the ways to do it. But yeah, that can be used, and that's what you're trying to do. I was saying earlier on, is you want to use what you're already doing.
And we've got another question here from Gillian. Is the one-to-one programme ongoing?
Yes, it is. It is at least for the next 12 months. In some cases, it's I've organised monthly catch-up with organisation. In some cases, it just comes and goes. It's likely you get an email from me once you've had a one-to-one about providing the information you look at, but also figuring out what progress you're making. A key interest is into the roadmap and the learnings and outcomes with that, which I've explained, and the link with skills provider, because we're working very closely with Skills Development Scotland. So it's interesting to understand what the skill needs are. So yes, the one-to-one is open to everybody, and you can still organize a one-to-one for this year.
No further questions at the moment, Eric. We've got one from Phil Weir. Thank you for a very informative webinar. You talked about a spreadsheet being available. Is this on the Scottish Engineering website?
Yes, it is. So the spreadsheet I mentioned was about the standards, and thank you for the feedback. But in the standards and webinar 7, what you have is you can go to the slide, and they give you an overview of the standards, which give you the overarching principles. And from that, then you can go to the Excel document, which is in that standards, in that place when you go. And again, I think, Sarah, could you send the link to that standard?
Yeah, certainly.
And so we'd send that out, but in there you've got an Excel file, and because there is a lot more details than what it was used to inform the webinar, there's a lot more details in there. So that's where you find that spreadsheets I've mentioned, webinar 7. On standards, it doesn't say standard, it says understand net zero standards webinar. Top left here.
Phil says thank you. No further questions at the moment by the looks of it.
Okay.
It's up to you if you want to wrap things up.
Okay, well, 9:45, I think, so I may be able to give you 15 minutes back. I would like to thank you all for joining us and taking the time. As I said numerous times during the webinar, we're here to help, and we're here to add value to your business by adding value to your people, your customers, and yourselves. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and that will conclude the webinar.
You just shut that down.